Ch.68, to ascend is human, to fall is also human. 3.
Hong Hong whipped around, stuffed his face in Si Lian's chest, and wailed.
This wailing contained no words, utterly meaningless, and was nothing like the sound of sobbing, but was
nevertheless hair-raisingly dreadful.
Without looking at who it was, it would sound like the desperate cries of a full-grown man breaking down, or the struggling of a small beast with its throat cut open by a knife. As if only by immediate death could he be relieved. Anyone could make such a sound, it just shouldn't be coming from a child of 10 years. Everyone was shaken. A moment later, Guoshi said, "I mean it. It's best to let go." Feng Xin finally came to and yelled, "Your Highness! Let go. Be careful of," but in the end, he didn't have the heart to continue. "It's fine," Si Lian said. That Zhu Shisheng, however, was quite concerned for His Highness' welfare, and saw that Hong Hong
was smearing blood and snot all over Si Lian's white robes, so he ran over to pull at that young child,
berating, "Little kid, you can't."
Yet the harder he pulled, the harder that young child held on to Si Lian, refusing to let go no matter
what, using both his hands and feet to grip on, screaming "Ahhhh." 3 or 4 more people came forward to try and rip him off, but instead that made him hang on to Si Lian like a little monkey. Si Lian
found it both funny and pitiful, and held Hong Hong with one hand, gently rubbing up and down that
emaciated small back in comfort, while raising the other hand. "Never mind. Don't worry, let him be." Some moments later, after feeling that the child in his arms stopped struggling and quieted down, Si Lian asked the people closer by in a low whisper, "Was anyone else hurt in the Xianlei pavilion fire?" "No," Mu King replied. "There were only us inside at the time." As the Xianlei pavilion was burned to a crisp, Si Lian could no longer stay.
After making sure that it was only the building that was burnt and not any of the people, those who came to help put out the fires, started to help clean up the vicinity, feeling rather distraught at all the charred precious gems and treasures. Si Lian wasn't concerned, however. The things he used daily were a little more intricate, but other than that, Si Lian didn't really have anything of importance stored inside the Xianlei pavilion. The most precious items were his collection of over 200 treasured swords, but they were made of durable metals unafraid of fires, since they
were all forged in flames anyway, so they were all unharmed. After having dug them out himself, Si Lian stored them temporarily at the Xixiang pavilion that belonged to the Guoshi. As for Hong Hong he was still firmly holding on to Si Lian, and after having cried himself to exhaustion, fell asleep. Si Lian had wanted to bring him down Mount Taikang to find a safe place to settle
him, but the Guoshi asked him to make a visit to the Xixiang pavilion first, so Si Lian carried the child
over to tucking that young child in the divan, writing the covers. Si Lian dropped the bedside curtain and backed out of the room with Feng Xin and Mu King in tow. Guoshi, is the child's fate really that terrifying? The Guoshi pursed his lips. Why don't you think for yourself, after he appeared, what has happened? The 3 were quiet. The moment that young child appeared, he'd fallen off the city wall before the eyes
of millions, forcing the Shangyuan heavenly ceremonial procession to be cut short after having only made 3 rounds.
When he appeared again, Qi-Rong was dragging him through the streets in that horse carriage in rage, causing a riot, made Feng Xin break an arm, and Si Lian butted heads with the king, making the queen roll tears. This time all the resentful spirits of Mount Taikang broke out of their seals within the black pagodas and even burned down the Xianlei pavilion. Misfortune was indeed following after him like a shadow. Is there any way to break this? Si Lian asked. Break this?
The Guoshi said.
What do you mean? Change his fate? Si Lian nodded. The Guoshi said, Your Highness, you haven't learned the art of fortune-telling from me. So when it comes to matters like these, you really don't understand anything. If you did, you wouldn't have asked. Si Lian was taken aback and sat himself up straight. Please enlighten me. The Guoshi thus took the teapot on the table and poured a cup. Your Highness, do you still remember that day when you just turned 6, when His Majesty and the Queen bade me to enter the palace to tell your fortune, that one question I asked you? Watching that steaming cup of tea, Si Lian pondered.
Did you mean the 2 people and the cup of
water?
That year, the Guoshi had asked Si Lian many questions in order to help tell his fortune.
There were questions with answers, and ones without, and with every answer Si Lian gave, the Guoshi would praise the boy, making the king and queen smile with pleasure. Many exchanges from that conversation were later passed around as delightful stories. But there was one question to which, when Si Lian answered,
the Guoshi made no commentary.
Very few knew of the details, not even Feng Xin, never mind Mu King. That question was 2 people and a cup of water. The Guoshi spoke. 2 walked the desert, about to die from thirst, and there was only 1 cup of water. The one who drinks lives, the one who doesn't dies. If you were a god, who would you give that cup of water to?
Don't speak yet, I'll ask the other 2 and see how they answer. The last part of his words were directed to the 2 standing not too far behind. Mu King contemplated and responded cautiously.
May I ask who those 2 people are, what their natures are like, and what of their merits? A decision can only be made once all the details are known. Feng Xin, on the other hand, answered, I don't know. Don't ask me, tell them to decide amongst themselves. Si Lian pff ed and laughed. Guoshi admonished, What are you laughing about? Do you remember how you answered? Si Lian schooled his expression and said solemnly, Give another cup. Hearing this, between Feng Xin and Mu King, one turned his face away, the other lowered his head, as if
they couldn't bear to listen.
Si Lian turned his head back and said in all seriousness, Why are you guys laughing?
I'm serious. If I was a god, I would definitely give another cup.
The Guoshi gently shook that cup of tea in his hand, and the tea swelled in the cup, as if it had life on its own. He continued, All fortunes in the world, good or bad, are limited. Just like this cup of water, there's only so much. Once you've drunk your fill, there'll be no more left for others. If one receives more, the
other must receive less.
Throughout the ages, all conflicts are born from the fact that there are many in this world, but only one cup of water, and no matter who it's given to, there'd be a good reason. You want to change fate. It's difficult, but not impossible. But if you change that child's life, someone else's life will also be changed.
And more grudges shall be created.
Once upon a time you said to just give another cup of water, just like today how you wanted to choose a third path. Your intention is to expand the source, a beautiful thought. But I will tell you it's impossible. Si Lian listened silently but disagreed wholeheartedly. Still, he didn't rebut. Thank you, Guoshi, for your wisdom.
The Guoshi drank the tea, smacked his lips and said, "Don't trouble yourself.
Wisdom or not, you don't listen anyway." Having been seen through, Si Lian softly cleared his throat. Guoshi, earlier today before the great martial hall, in a moment of passion, this disciple has offended you. Please forgive me for my affront. The Guoshi shook out his sleeves and smiled. You're my proud disciple, and the crown prince, how can I not forgive you? Your Highness, I can tell you that you are the most beloved by the heavens I've ever seen. Si Lian didn't understand, so he listened closely. The Guoshi continued, you have the talent, the ambition, the heart, and you're not afraid of hard work.
You have a prestigious background, yet a compassionate nature.
No one is more suited for the title. Darling of the heavens. Still, I am worried about you.
I'm afraid there will be a trial you won't be able to
pass. And that is? Si Lian asked. Although you've already achieved such a high level, there are some things you are still far from
understanding, and others can't teach you.
Just like how today at the great martial hall, that speech you made, that bit about not worshipping God or something, very few are able to think that far, and that you were able to reach such thoughts at such a young age is already impressive. However, do not think
yourself the only one who to have had such thoughts in the world.
Si Lian's eyes widened slightly.
The Guoshi continued, the things you spoke of today were already spoken by others decades, maybe
centuries ago, but their words never took form, their voices were too small, so not many heard. Have you ever wondered why that is? Si Lian hummed and replied, because even if they thought of it, they never acted on it, and weren't determined enough. And you? What makes you think you're determined enough?
The Guoshi asked. Guoshi, do you think I can ascend?
Si Lian asked. The Guoshi gave him a look and said, if you can't ascend, then no one can. It's only a matter of time. Si Lian smiled. Then, just you watch. He pointed to the sky. If one day I ascend, I will for sure do all that I said today, and become a power to behold. Feng Xin and Mu King, who were standing behind him, having heard his declaration, both unconsciously held their heads higher.
Feng Xin's lips curved upward, and the light shining in Mu King's eyes were exactly the same as Si Lian's.
The Guoshi nodded.
Very well, I shall wait and see. However, I don't think it's a good thing for you to ascend too early. Let me
ask you, what is the path? Si Lian inclined his head. As you have said, that which is walked is the path. That's correct, the Guoshi said.
But you haven't walked enough. So, I think it's time for you to take a
walk down the mountain. Si Lian's face lit up. The Guoshi continued, "You're 17 this year. I will permit you to descend Mount Taikang, and gain some experience through travels on the outside." "That's excellent," Si Lian exclaimed. Every day spent at the royal capital, just thinking about the king, Qi Rong, and many others, Si Lian couldn't help but feel crabby. Plus, having such a glamorous Xianlei pavilion be torched, he wouldn't be able to avoid another bout with his parents. If he could go further away, he could focus on walking his own path. Just then, the Guoshi added, "Your Highness, throughout the ages there's been a saying that's passed down like it's the ultimate truth. But it's actually wrong, only no one had ever noticed." "What saying?" "When humans ascend, they become gods. When humans fall, they become ghosts." Si Lian gave it a thought. "Is there something wrong with that?" The Guoshi replied, "Of course it's wrong. Remember, when humans ascend, they are still human. When they fall, they are still human." Si Lian chewed on those words, and the Guoshi patted him on the shoulder and glanced behind. "In any case, as for that child, don't let it worry you too much. Everyone has their fate. Many times there won't be a way to help just because you want to help. If anything happens, we'll deal with it then. Go out and experience the world. I pray that when you return you will have matured." However, that very night, outside everyone's expectations, that child escaped from the royal holy pavilion and disappeared. And what was even more, outside of everyone's expectations, after his travels, at the age of 17, the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Xianlei Si Lian soundly defeated a nameless ghost at the Yinyan Bridge. And just like that, he ascended to the heavens amidst the roars of thunder and lightning. It was the shock of the three realms. Translation notes. The idea of ascension is a Taoist one. The basic gist of it is, all gods and immortals are mortals and other beings who cultivated deeply and attained enlightenment. Their bodies shed the troubles of a mortal body, and are removed from the corporeal world. Heaven is only an imperial court for the enlightened ones, and other than the ones in administrative roles like the Jade Emperor, etc. Many watched and protected over an aspect of the celestial and mortal realm, e.g. love, marriage, a piece of land, etc. There are also carefree immortals who just wander the world and help mortals as they go, or become hermits deep in the mountains. However, there is a formless will, Tao, of the universe that guides the world's destiny. Thus, things like fate and such are beyond a god's ability to change. It's the will of the universe that deems when a mortal is fit for ascension, and it will send forth a heavenly calamity, usually a blast of thunder and lightning, to test the mortal. If the mortal passes, they ascend to become a god. There are 3 different levels of godhood. Hollow circle lowest level is godhood after death. Hollow circle mid-level is godhood after living on Earth for an insane number of years. Hollow circle top level is ascension in broad daylight, before the eyes of all. For the top tier, the will of the universe usually picks those who have done deeds so great they have shocked the wheel of fortune, or have the potential to change the course of history. It's amoral, the
Question of whether the deed is right or wrong is not figured into this, which is why earlier in the book, MXTX said there's usually a lot of bloodshed involved. TLDR, C. Lian attained enlightenment and shed his mortal body. He did not die. Everyone knew because of the thunder and lightning. Next chapter. Ch.69, Fishing for Offerings, Boor meets Crown Prince. Unveil. Along with the strong, spirited call, an enormous red brocade fell to the ground. A roaring cheer exploded from the crowd of thousands. This was a golden divine statue of the Crown Prince. A sword in one hand, a flower in the other, symbolizing the power to end the world, but with a heart as gentle as a flower. The face of that statue was soft and beautiful, the brows long and elegant, lips thin and clean, slightly curved, as if smiling. Affectionate but not coquettish, fierce but not heartless. It was a compassionate and handsome face. This was the 8,000th temple of the Crown Prince within the kingdom of Xianlei. 3 years after ascension, there were 8,000 temples raised in his name. Such a passionate following was unseen in history and likely would not have any more like it in the future, the one and only. However, this 8,000th temple didn't have the most glamorous divine statue of the Crown Prince. Atop Mount Taikang, the summit where the Crown Prince resided in his youth during training was renamed the Crown Prince Summit. It was where the first Xianlei Pavilion was built. Once the first divine statue of the Crown Prince was sculpted, it was also there where the king personally unveiled it. That divine statue of the Crown Prince was 5 meters high, its craftsmanship legendary. It was built of pure, solid gold, truly an invaluable golden body. Within the Xianlei Pavilion, devotees were endless, breaking through the threshold. The incense vessel before the pavilion was stuffed with incense long and short, and the donation box was also much bigger than the average donation boxes in other temples, because if it wasn't built big enough, it would be full of offerings before the day was over, and those who came after wouldn't be able to donate. In the courtyard of the temple was a clear pond, also filled with coins, shimmering brightly in the water. Many of the turtles residing in the ponds didn't dare to peep their heads out anymore from all the coins that were thrown by the devotees, many bouncing off their shells. No matter how the cultivators asked the people not to do, so they were fruitless. Within the massive red walls of the temple were planted plum trees, the branches tied with countless bright red ribbons of wishes, painting an impressive scenery of flowing red amongst a sea of blossoms. As for the interior of the temple, Si Lian was seated just below his divine statue, watching over the crowd. No one could see him, but he could see and hear their chatter. How come the temple of the Crown Prince doesn't have prostration cushions? Yeah, even the temple master said we can't prostrate. The temple's already unveiled, so why can't we prostrate? Another said, this must be your first time at the Xianlei Pavilion. The Xianlei Pavilions are all like this. Hereafter His Royal Highness ascended, he sent dreams to many temple donors, to the temple master, telling them not to have the devotees prostrate. So, none of the temples of the Crown Prince have anywhere you can prostrate. Although no one could see him, Si Lian still nodded his head. However, a few others laughed.
What's the logic in that? Aren't we meant to prostrate before gods? That must have been a rumor. See Lian A. ed. Another added, that's right. We must kneel. Only kneeling can show our sincerity.
Thus, one took the lead and knelt down, and soon after, a large number of others followed suit and knelt
down on the ground. Hundreds and thousands of people squished inside and outside of the great hall, and started kowtowing before the divine statue, their forms rising and falling, muttering and silently praying for blessings.
See Lian quietly hid.
Never mind, we'll take it slowly. The next moment, a large wave of noise came at him from all around. Achieve a high rank. A high rank. This year I must achieve a high rank. If I obtain it, I will return my gratitude. Pray for safe passage. The girl I like likes my shishung, please make him uglier, please I beg you. I won't believe I still can't give birth to a fucking chubby brat. Exclamation mark.
Exclamation mark. There were all kinds of prayers. See Lian was getting a headache just listening, and hurriedly cast a
spell, blocking out those endless voices. His ears had only just quieted down when there was yelling, and a man clad in black came running out from the back of the pavilion, his hands covering his ears.
He roared, "What the hell are those prayers?"
Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. The devotees also didn't sense the appearance of this man and continued kowtowing. See Lian breathed a
sigh, patted his shoulder and laughed.
Feng Xin, thanks for your hard work. Such an exuberant Xianlei pavilion, the number of prayers that Si Lian could hear every day exceeded thousands. At first, he was filled with the energy brought forth by the new position, had little care whether the matters were big or small, and worked through them personally.
After a while, there were
really way too many prayers, so he'd split off a block and gave them to Feng Xin and Mu King. What was within his duties and what could be ignored, after filtering through the prayers, the two would pass the important matters back to him. After filtering through the prayers, Mu King would report back without ever a complaint, but Feng Xin, on the other hand, just couldn't understand why there were so many who'd blindly pray over petty business. Even blessings for harmonious bedchamber matters were brought to the Xianlei pavilion. Si Lian was a martial god, and certainly couldn't take care of such things. This kept up and offended other heavenly officials too, blaming them for taking matters they had no control over, taking devotees they had no
business to take, to which Si Lian couldn't rebut.
Feng Xin still had his hands covering his ears, even if that gesture did nothing.
Your Highness, why do
you have so many female devotees? Si Lian shook out his sleeves and remained seated within the clouds of incense, smiling.
What's wrong with having so many female devotees?
Beauties are like the clouds, pleasing to the eyes. Feng Xin dropped his face.
Not good at all. It's like those female devotees had no other prayers than
wishing to look nicer, marry nicer, give birth to a nice son. Nothing of importance, just looking at them gives me a headache. Si Lian grinned and was about to continue when suddenly there was a commotion among the crowd. The two looked outside the hall and heard someone speak with a low voice. Prince Xiaojing has come, let's get out of here.
Prince Xiaojing is here.
Hearing Prince Xiaojing, it was like everyone heard the devil. All dropped their faces and dispersed.
Like birds.
A moment later, it was as if a tornado blew by, and all the devotees who were in the hall escaped. Soon after, a young man dressed in lavish brocade and a cape crossed the threshold swaggering.
A glass gem lamp in his hands.
Without looking at his eyes, his face resembled that of Si Lian, but seeing the eyes, one would think him overly cocky.
It was none other than Qi Rong.
Qi Rong had reached the age of 17 or 18 by now, his face broadened, his disposition much more mature, he finally had an air of nobility.
He entered through the doors, but didn't allow any of his
attendants to come in. He held that lamp with both his hands and knelt down on the clean floors of the
hall, his cape fluttering down.
He raised the lamp to his forehead and solemnly prostrated.
The two on top
of the altar shared a look.
Feng Xin smacked his lips and Si Lian understood the annoyance in his eyes.
3 years ago when Si Lian first left the royal capital to travel the world, Qi Rong was still in detention. After his return, he hadn't yet had the chance to see his little cousin before he suddenly ascended that very night in his sleep. Within those 3 years, Si Lian sent a number of dreams to his parents, to the Guoshi, and a few others.
He sent one to Qi Rong once, admonishing him to be kind to
others from then on, to keep his behavior in check and not to cause trouble. Thus, Qi Rong had been doing his utmost to build temples everywhere, offering donations and lamps for good merits.
Although he worked hard, sincere to the bones, he would still stir up trouble every now and then, and it
would be Feng Xin who had to go clean up after him.
Because of this, Si Lian could understand Feng
Xin's annoyance. On the floor, Qi Rong finished paying his respects and started whining, "Cousin Crown Prince, this is the 500th lamp I've offered. I'm such a loyal little brother, when will you come see me? Even a dream is fine. Uncle and auntie both miss you dearly, but you only ignore us. Truly high and mighty and cold." He did not notice at all that Feng Xin was right there, who was reminding Si Lian, "Don't pay attention to him. The Heavenly Emperor has told you that, unless it's a matter of importance, heavenly officials are not allowed to show themselves privately before mortals.
Families must be avoided."
"Don't worry, I know," Si Lian said. Qi Rong rose to his feet holding that lamp, reached for a brush, and started writing on that lamp with his head lowered. Si Lian and Feng Xin felt bad, so they approached to see what he was writing. Seeing that it was something normal like pray for the country's prosperity and blessed climate, and so on, and not praying for some family to be beheaded before the marketplace or some such, the two breathed a sigh. Watching Qi Rong write so carefully and properly, Si Lian was reminded of something. When Qi Rong first returned to the palace with his mother, there was once a group of royals and nobles who mounted Mount Taikang to pray for blessings.
Qi Rong's mother was a returnee after having eloped
with a lowly peasant and didn't dare to see anyone, but she always wanted blessings for her son, have him experience the world, and not be stuffed inside like herself, turning into an ignorant nobody, so she begged the queen to bring Qi Rong along.
Although it was already kept fairly low-key, a royal scandal went around faster than an arrow, and there wasn't anyone in the royal capital who didn't know what happened to that mother and son.
Thus, along the way, many sons of nobles purposely left Qi out, not playing with or talking to him. Si Lian saw a swing set and ran over to play, and all the children of the same age ran after him, taking turns to push the crown prince on the swings, taking it as an honorable task. When Si Lian was swung to the highest point, he subconsciously looked down and saw Qi hiding behind his mother's shadow, ahead, peeking out, watching him with envy. Once they reached the great martial hall, the grown-ups, after having offered lights, moved to beg the Guoshi for fortunes, or for deciphering their fortunes, and conversed amongst themselves, leaving the children within the hall to offer up small lamps for play. It was Qi first time meeting the queen, and he did not know she had already offered a light in his and his mother's name. He saw how beautiful the lamps were and wanted to offer one up for blessings. 2. He was young and didn't understand much, so he asked all those around how to write words of prayer for his mother. The children from Qi branch of the family already detested him, under the influence from their elders. They all thought that mother and son had shamed the family, so they intentionally tricked him. When Si Lian finished writing on his lamp and put down the brush, he heard malicious giggling from behind, and when he turned his head, he saw Qi with his hands covered in ink, holding a lamp like a precious treasure, his face full of smiles, about to offer the light. Yet on that lamp, the words "Pray my mother and I pass away to the heavens, Qi were written in ugly scribbles. Si Lian broke that lamp on the spot, furious and outraged. He wasn't very old at the time, but all the noble young men and children were terrified, prostrating on the ground, afraid to speak. After containing himself, Si Lian personally rewrote prayers on a new lamp for Qi and no one dared play any tricks after that. Later, when they descended the mountain, Si Lian went to swing on the swings again. This time, Qi emerged from behind the queen and pushed him. He was shorter than Si Lian, but he pushed especially enthusiastically, still gazing at him from below. Only this gaze had changed into one of worship. After that, he became Si Lian's tail, wagging behind his cousin crown prince. It must be said that Qi had once been somewhat normal, but somehow had become more and more off the track along the way. However, in those 3 years, there were too many people and too many matters Si Lian had to care for, and had no time for relations of old. He certainly didn't know whether Qi had matured. While he was still reminiscing, Qi had already offered his light and was getting ready to leave the hall. Unexpectedly, as he backed away, he bumped into another. Qi staggered, then whipped around and started cussing without even seeing who it was. What the hell? Are you blind, or did you die on the spot forgetting to move? The moment he opened his mouth, Si Lian and Feng Xin both covered their faces, thinking, he hasn't changed at all, still the same. Maybe it was because he had lived with his father until he was 5, and couldn't help but be influenced by the rowdy market environment and his father's violent temper. But even after, when the queen patiently tried to educate Chi Rong. The moment he got agitated by the Guoxi's words, he'd reveal his true form. The one who bumped into Chi Rong was an unkempt young man, of 24 or 5 years, carrying a simple satchel, his straw slippers so worn they were almost rimless and baseless, covered in dust. However, even though this young man was wan and sallow, his lips dried and cracking, his form slumping. His face was bright, thin but not weak, and his eyes were shining. "What is this place?" he asked. "This is the Xianlei Pavilion, the temple of the Crown Prince," Chi Rong replied. That man started mumbling, "Temple of the Crown Prince. Crown Prince. So this is the palace." He saw the divine statue inside, the gold reflecting on his face, and he asked again, "Is that gold?" Seeing how glamorous the pavilion was, he had taken the temple as the royal palace. The guard approached to chase him away, and Chi Rong said, "Of course it's gold. The temple of the Crown Prince is a temple, not the pavilion at the imperial palace. You don't even know where you are. Where did a barbarian like you come from?" "Then where's the palace?" that man asked. Chi Rong squinted his eyes. "Why do you ask?" That man replied in a serious tone, "I need to go to the palace and see the king. I have something to tell him." Chi Rong and the guards burst out laughing, their expressions condescending. "Where did this country bumpkin come from? You want to do what at the palace? Want to see the king? Is he someone you can see just because you want to? They probably won't even let you through the gates when you get there." That man didn't seem to be affected by the taunt. "I'll go try. Maybe it'll work." Chi Rong laughed. "Then go try." Then he raised his hand and purposely pointed in the wrong direction. "Thanks," that man said, adjusted his satchel, then turned to walk out of the hall. When he reached the stone bridge, he suddenly stopped in his step. Through the clear pond water, layers upon layers of coins could be seen sunken below. That young man seemed to have pondered for a moment. And the next second, he leapt over the bridge railing and jumped into the pond. He was agile and skilled. Once in the pond, he bent down and started fishing up bundles and bundles of coins, stuffing them into the satchel in his arms. Since they had never seen anyone who dared rob the offerings of a god, Si Lian and Feng Xin were both stunned. Chi Rong was also taken aback and immediately erupted in anger, rushing to the bridge and slapped at the railing, yelling, "What the fuck? What are you doing?" Exclamation mark. "Someone pull him out!" Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. "What the actual fuck?" Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. A number of guards immediately jumped into the water to pull that young man out, but unexpectedly, he was also quite skilled, throwing punches and kicks, not letting anyone close. Chi Rong was jumping up and down in rage, and none of the cultivators in the yard could do anything. That young man fished up a bag full and heavy with coins, carried his satchel anew and was ready to climb ashore but accidentally stepped on moss. His feet slipped, and fell back into the waters in a large splash. The guards thus took this chance to seize him, wrangling him back ashore. Chi Rong raised his leg to stomp, yelling, "You dare steal this money!" Exclamation mark. When Qi Rong raised his leg, Feng Xin was already standing on the side, catching the right moment and
blocked, so it looked like Qi Rong's stomp was vicious, but it actually landed lightly.
Although Qi Rong couldn't see the one playing tricks, he still felt something was off, like a ghost clinging to his leg. He kicked a number of times and it was the same feeling, making him feel rather lousy. That young man seemed to have choked on water and coughed a few times. That money was just lying
there in the pond. Why can't I use it to save people?
Qi Rong, unsatisfied by his kicks, finally stopped from irritation. Save who? Who are you?
Where'd you
come from? He only asked so he could sentence that young man to a crime and throw him into prison, but that young
man still answered honestly.
My name is Lang Ying. 9.
I'm from Yong'an.
We're going through a drought, there's no water, the crops won't grow, and everyone's starving because there's no income. There's water here, and food, and money. You use gold to build statues, and throw coins into water, so why can't you share some with us? Yong'an was a large city within the kingdom of Xianlei. Si Lian rose to his feet, his expression serious. Feng Xin, there's a drought in Yong'an.
How come I didn't hear of this? Feng Xin turned his head back.
I don't know. I didn't hear anything either.
Let's ask Mu King later.
9. This Lang Ying is not the same individual as the ghost child Lang Ying from the present timeline. The character for Ying is different. Lang Ying, this character, versus Lang Ying, the ghost child character.